Good afternoon. I'm Walter Gardner, the Mayor of the town of Warrenton. On behalf of the Board of Directors and the officers of the Kerr-Tar Regional Council of Government, I welcome you to our final act and presentation of the afternoon. Doug Griffith retired from politics in January 2015 to actively pursue his passion of helping communities, organizations, and businesses grow stronger. In his best-selling book, 13 Ways to Kill Your Community, Doug identifies challenges and opportunities that all our communities face. The lessons that come from those stories are applicable to all types of communities, whether they are counties, towns, its organizations, or businesses. After teaching for several years, Doug successfully served as an elected member of the Legislative Assembly in the province of Alberta, being a native Canadian, for 4 consecutive terms. In that time, he served in 2 senior cabinet portfolios as Minister of Municipal Affairs and Minister of Service, Alberta, as well as 3 junior positions in agriculture, finance, and Solicitor General. Doug's talents include being able to see through the lies we tell each other, overcoming bad attitudes, targeted and focused tactical planning, and communicating with those who are afraid of change. His passion lies in building strong communities, because within strong communities, leadership can succeed, businesses can prosper, and families can find great qualities of lives. Doug may be with us a little bit longer than he actually anticipated because his flight out of RDU tomorrow morning has already been canceled. But I want to make sure you're aware, not a drop has fallen outside here in Henderson, and my Doppler radar doesn't show anything all the way to Burlington, so we ought to be good for the afternoon. So I ask that you join me in welcoming to the podium this afternoon Doug Griffith.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I don't like using the podium, just so you know. I was a junior high teacher, and so if I sat behind the desk, students would pass notes, right? So if I moved around, they didn't pass notes, so you can pass notes, you're growing up. But I still have trouble sitting still when I'm talking because I'm very passionate about this subject. And yes, my flight tomorrow was already canceled. It hasn't even snowed yet. I mean, I'm from Canada. We got this much snow. A month ago, they canceled the buses going to the school because it was minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit. But the school was still open. Kids could still go, and lots showed up. So I know it's a different world. It just proves that we all come from different places and we all have a lot to understand about each other. So one thing you need to know about that introduction, which I very much appreciate, is that yes, I was an elected politician in the provincial legislature equivalent to your state legislature. I even at one point ran for the leader of my party, which would have made me governor, but I lost, and that was okay. I spent 13 years doing what I loved. Now, just so you know, I left politics on purpose after 13 years, and I've been through rehab. I'm fully recovered. There's no recidivism happening here. I'm not going back. I left deliberately so I could go back to community building. See, a long time ago, I grew up in a really small town, about 1,500 people, and that 1,500-person town was great. We grew up on a ranch. We had horses and we had cattle, purebred Black Angus and a bunch of commercial cattle, and I went off to school because where I came from, you only had 3 choices in life. If you were really ambitious and wanted to make money, you went and worked in oil and gas. If you were hardworking and dedicated, you took over the farm, and if you were smart, you went off to the city, to university, and you didn't come back. It was literally, if you're smart, why would you stay here? So I was one of the smarter kids in school, and I went off to university. And I was planning on going to law school. I got an honors degree in philosophy, and then decided I didn't want to go to law school. And I didn't want to be in the city because I didn't need to be in the city to do big things. So I came home, and I did the only thing you could do with an honors degree in philosophy. I fed cows. I fed a lot of cows. And then I realized I needed to do something, so I got a teaching degree, so I became a junior high teacher. And it was great. I mean, I made enough money from teaching to subsidize my ranching habit. Right? I bought more cows and I bought more horses, and life was grand. And I had the perfect life. I lived in one town, I ranched in another, and I taught in another. And then I realized all three of those communities were dying. Young people were leaving, businesses were closing, housing prices were in decline, the economy was suffering, and I thought, I need to do something. So I talked to anyone who would listen to me about the need for a rural community development strategy for our province. I mean, anyone. And I talked over and over again. I shot my mouth off every chance I could, and I shot it off one too many times because that's how I wound up in provincial politics. If you ever want into politics, just keep talking. And if you ever want out of politics, just keep talking. It's the best way to do either one. But I wound up in the legislature, and I got to serve in all those cabinet portfolios. I had such power and such authority, and things were great. But the best job I ever got was the very first one, where I wrote a rural community development strategy. There are 422 different communities in the province of Alberta, and I went to over 200 of them in the first 2 years to talk about what we needed to do. Listen to what people had to say. And I wrote a report called Land of Opportunity. And in there were 72 recommendations for rural communities that covered health, education, community infrastructure, economic development, youth, seniors, tourism, arts, culture, water, wastewater infrastructure, housing, you name it, it was in the report. And then I gave it to our leader, the premier, and he said, go tell people about it. This is a great report. So I traveled all over Alberta again, telling everybody what they needed to do around health, education, community infrastructure, economic development, youth, seniors, tourism, arts, culture, water, wastewater infrastructure, housing, you name it. And everyone said, this is great. I love this report. We're going to do something with this. And then I realized they weren't. See, I had a problem. I put it in the report, and in every single presentation I did, I told people the federal, the provincial, state, and municipal governments have to be partners in making your community successful. It's critical. But if your community is really going to be successful, it's up to the people in the community to decide they want to be successful. And yet, every time I finish the presentation, within a few weeks, I get someone call me up and they'd say something like, Doug, when are we going to see the province do something about this report you wrote? When are we going to see some results from this strategy you wrote? When are you going to do something to make my community better? They missed the point. And then I had what I call a re-epiphany. See, the first epiphany I had was when I was a junior high teacher. I would go talk to high school students about how to be successful in life, right? And it was a very similar presentation every single time. Study hard, don't do drugs, marry someone nice, right? Pretty straightforward. And they'd all look at me and go, yeah, my mom told me that this morning. But not one of them changed what they were doing or had this powerful realization as I wanted. So I walked into the classroom one day and I looked out at them, and that's when the first epiphany hit me. And I said to them, I want you to describe what it looks like if you're 45 years old and you have ruined your life. What would it look like? Now, they're high school students, so it would take them a minute to warm up, but somebody would put up their hand and say, I'd become a drug addict. So I'd write that on the board. Somebody else would say, I'd fail out of school and then I couldn't get a good job and take care of my family. So I'd write that on the board. Somebody else would say, oh, you know what? I'd get pregnant or get someone prematurely pregnant. It might not ruin my life, but it might set me back. Whatever they came up with, I wrote on the board. And then I would ask them to imagine what they'd have to do today to make that goal a reality. They have to think that they want to ruin their lives. They want to achieve that. What would they have to do starting today to make that a reality? So I said, let's start with being a drug addict. What would you do today? Now, they're high school students again, so they'd be a little shy, but then someone would put up their hand and say, I'd smoke a joint after school, and 2 kids would turn red because that's what they did yesterday. Right? I'd say, oh, you want to fail out of school so you can't get a good job? How would you start today? And somebody would say, I'd fail the math test we have this afternoon, and then they'd all look at me like, are you done? I have to go study. Right? say, oh, you want to get prematurely pregnant or get someone pregnant, what would you do today? And they'd all turn red because it wasn't sex ed class, right? And that was it. The point was that every single one of those students had hopes and dreams and goals and ambitions, plans for their future. But every single one of those students did something to undermine their own success. They traded away what they wanted most for what they wanted now, what was easy and convenient and pleasurable. And then it occurred to me that it's not just high school students that do that. Everyone does that. Everyone has plans for their future, but we make decisions every single day that undermine those big long-term plans. We trade away what we want most for what we want now. And then it occurred to me that it's not just people, communities do that too. See, I've spoke all over North America, and I have not been to a single community that does not have plans for their future. They've got tourism plans and marketing plans and economic plans and infrastructure plans and recreation plans. We need a plan just to manage all the plans we have. We're not short on plans and visions for our future, but I have not been to a single solitary community yet that I don't see them doing something to undermine those long-term plans. They trade away something they want now that's easy and convenient, or for them, and away those big plans for their community. So that's what this presentation is about. Now, there's a few things you need to know before we get started. One, no matter if you're offended during this presentation, that's your fault, not mine. Because I'm going to be brutally honest, I'm going to be very factual, and I'm going to challenge the way you think. Now, if you're offended, you're not listening well enough. Because I'm not here to attack you, I'm not here to demean you, I'm not here to do anything to make you feel guilty. I'm here to educate you, because if we just stop doing the things that sabotage our community success, we'll be successful. And if you heard from my introduction, building communities is the single most important job on earth. So if you're offended, it's because you've stopped listening, and it's because you're doing one of these things, right? Number two, I never name names in this, ever. Maybe one if I tell you a story about my hometown, because you could look it up. But I don't name names because I've discovered if I name the community, I have people say, oh yeah, I know them, they're idiots. But I've discovered that when I don't name names and I tell the story anyway, anonymously, that people come up to me after and say, did you write that about us? Because that's what we did last week. And it was proven to me when I got a phone call from Texas when I was going to run to be premier, governor, and I was just about to announce. So I got a phone call from a lady in Texas who said, would you come and do your 13 Ways presentation for us? And I said, I can't. I'm about to make a big announcement, and I can't go anywhere for the next year. And she said, okay. Now, you talk about one community, and if I guess the name of that community, though, will you admit it? Because it's bugging me. I said, sure, go ahead. And it was, I think, the third story in chapter 7 or something was the community that she wanted to know about. So she told me her hometown in Texas, the name of it, and said, that's what we did. I said, it wasn't about you. And she called me a liar. She said, you're lying. You promised you would tell me. And I almost faxed her a copy of my passport so she could see I hadn't been to the U.S. in years or to Texas ever. Now, I've been there 3 times. They have some issues. We all have some issues. But it proved to me that we all do these sorts of things. So please don't be offended, because this isn't meant to be criticizing or chastising. This is meant to be informative so you can stop doing this. And lastly, you need to know that no matter what you think I'm talking about, whether you think it is about infrastructure, you think it's about politics, you think it's about governance, no matter what you think it's about attitude. That's it. Because we can't control what happens to us, but we can control what we do about it. And our attitude determines whether or not we're going to be successful in our challenges or not. In fact, I've heard there is in Mandarin, one of the Chinese languages, there is a character that if you flip it on its head means the opposite. This side means opportunity and this side means challenge. And it's amazing how many people I found that can take any opportunity and recognize the challenges and let it go, and how many people can actually recognize the challenges and turn them into opportunities. They're just two sides of the same coin, and it's all determined by your attitude. So, are you ready? All right, here we go. 13 ways to Kill your community. There we go. Forget the water, both the quality and the quantity. Now, I get to kind of pass over this one really quickly because in all the stuff that I've learned about what's going on in this region, you guys are one of the few regions that have really focused on water and security of supply, which is good because if you, I mean, I actually thought about taking this chapter out when I rewrote the book in 2016 because I thought it's the 21st century. We don't have water issues anymore. And then Flint, Michigan happened. And it reminded us that what happens when egos get in the way of good decisions. And Flint, Michigan pulled out of the water system with Detroit, and 12 people died when they turned on their old water system because of contamination. Now thousands of children apparently have been exposed to lead content so high it may have caused brain damage, and there are massive lawsuits involved because of the damage done to those children because Flint, Michigan wanted to control their own system. They wanted to be autonomous. The fact you guys have come together and worked on that is wonderful. It will ensure that you have quality water and supply of water, but don't ever let your egos get in the way like it did between Flint and Detroit, because you'll put people's lives at risk. And people demand, I got to quit saying that. People don't demand good quality water now, they just expect it. They trust you're going to provide it. And if you don't believe me, then tomorrow, oh no, wait till the snow clears, the next day. Go down to your local gas station, your favorite one, and listen to everyone complaining about paying, $2.30 for a gallon of gasoline. But most of them will pay $1.50 for a little 500 milliliter, half a liter bottle of water and not say a word because they expect quality water. And quantity is equally important because you can't do anything without water. Agriculture, value-added agriculture, industrial development, commercial development, housing developments, you have to have water. Now, I still see some of my former MLA elected official colleagues. I'm from Alberta. We're like the Texas of the North, oil and gas and agriculture everywhere, right? Lots of cows. And I talk to them sometimes and they say, you know what, Doug? The next world war will be fought over oil because oil drives the economy of the world. And I smile at them every single time and say, maybe that might be the case, but the last world war will be over water because whoever controls water controls everything. It's the most precious resource on earth. And if you need a reminder, I'll pass on the same wisdom my grandpa said to me. When you're thinking about what's really critically important in your lives, remember you can only go for 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food, or you die. You can do without just about everything else. So you guys should be proud of yourselves about the quality and the quantity of water and coming together because very few regions have. Next, number 2, don't attract businesses, especially ones that compete with yours. True story. Now, look, when I was doing that rural development strategy with the 72 recommendations, right, I would go to events and I would stand on stage and I would talk to people in my politician suit, and people would tell me what they wanted me to hear. But I would put on my boots and my sport coat and wander around Main Street and talk to people, and I discovered that they would say things that needed to be said, which are two different things. So I spent a lot of time on Main Street talking to people. And I discovered that I would go into communities of a couple thousand people, and I would, with one grocery store, that's important, and I would ask the grocery store owner, how's business? And they'd say, well, I don't know if we can do this much longer. I mean, we kind of live week to week. I don't know if our family could depend on this. It's really tough to try and make a living, et cetera, et cetera. But I would go to communities of a couple thousand people that had 2 grocery stores, and I would ask the grocery store owners to tell me about how they were doing. And they'd say things like, well, I'm not buying a Maserati and the kids aren't going to go to Harvard, but we make a good living doing this. I thought, that's weird. I mean, 2,000 people split between 2 businesses. They're both doing well, but 2,000 people with only one there, and that business can't make a living. And then it struck me what the difference was: competition. Competition gives us price, quality, selection, service, atmosphere, all sorts of things. So I would go to the community with 2 grocery stores and I would ask the people to tell me about their grocery stores. And they'd say things like, well, I go to that one because they have the best price on canned goods, but I go to that one because they have the best quality meat products. And other people would say, well, I go to that one because they have the best variety of produce, but I go to that one sometimes because the bag boys carry the groceries out for me. Price, quality, selection, service. But I would go to the community with one grocery store and I'd ask the public to tell me about theirs, and they'd say things, well, like, I want to shop local and I want to support local business. That's important. Except sometimes I go in there and the milk is $2 more a jug than it is anywhere else, and it's going to expire the next day half the time because they don't bring enough supply. And sometimes I ask them to bring in some special stuff for me, and they're like, do you think I can afford to do that for you? Everybody else too? It'll make me broke. Sometimes I walk in there and I look at the owner and they glare at me like, what do you want? I'm busy right now. So I just leave. No price, no quality, no selection, no service. Where do you think they go? Down the road to the community with 2 grocery stores where competition gives them better price, quality, selection, and service. We all know the value of competition, don't we? Well, I was in a community and I was interviewing these 2 young people that opened up a gas station. 2 young entrepreneurs. And I thought, I need to interview them and get their story. This is going to be fascinating. It's going to be interesting. So I interviewed them. There was nothing interesting about their story, except one thing. They mentioned their hometown was an hour down the road. And I asked them, why didn't you open the gas station there? They only have one. They need another one. They said, oh, we tried. We couldn't get the building permits. We couldn't get the development permits. We couldn't get the zoning done. Eventually, the town wouldn't even call us back. I asked them why they did that to them, and they said, I don't know. So I went to the town to find out, and I wanted to make sure I got this right. So I didn't just ask a few people. I asked everyone who had talked to me about what happened, and everyone in town knew. I mean, everyone. And they all said the same thing. They'd look at me sheepishly and a little shy and sad, and they'd say, well, the mayor at the time owned the Shell gas station across the street from where they wanted to build and didn't want the competition. Now, because I had asked so many questions, I heard other stories. There was another couple, opened a business, tried to, couldn't get it open, moved an hour down the road in the other direction. I said, so why would the mayor care about that? They said, oh no, there was someone else in charge that time, and they didn't want the competition because they had a business that would compete. I heard so many stories in that community when I asked around. I started to feel like a Catholic priest at church on Sunday, right? I mean, people were confessing all sorts of stuff to me. One lady came in and sat down while I was having lunch in the town by myself, sat down and said, can I talk to you? I have to get something off my chest. I said, go ahead. So she said, look, I was the front person at the town office for almost 25 years. I didn't have any authority or power, just the first person people would see. And we had people come in and say, I'm a welder. I want to buy some industrial land. I'm going to build a welding shop and hire a bunch of welders. It's going to be great. The economy here is fantastic. And she would say, we don't have any industrial land for sale, or it's environmentally contaminated, it'll ruin you, or the economy's on the downturn but no one will admit it, the housing prices are overinflated, whatever she could do to make them leave. And I looked across the table at her and said, why would you do that? And she said, because my husband was a welder and we didn't want the competition. This is in one community. Now, this is from the community I'm from, the province I'm from. The last bastion of conservative, business-minded people. I wish I could put you all in some sort of crystal ball and take you to that community and put you on the front so you could watch. And I would call a town hall meeting and everybody would show up and I would say, do you believe in competition? And they'd say, yes, Doug, we believe in business. We believe in the value of the free market. We believe in competition. Except that's a lie. It's a complete lie. If you only believe in competition when you're not the one being competed against, then that's not a value. That's a hobby. And frankly, it's completely worthless. So if you want to kill your community, then don't attract businesses, especially ones that compete with yours, and you can have a monopoly on failure. Cute, no? No, you get, yeah? Okay. Monopoly on failure. I like that one. It's catchy. Number 3, don't engage youth. So I'm going to tell you this right up front so that no one asks me, because people always ask me this. They come up to me and they say, Doug, what do we have to do to keep young people in our community? I get the impression I'll go to your town and I'll see young people chained up to mailboxes and light posts so they can't get out of town, right? How do we keep them? That's the wrong approach. The nature of youth is to go off and explore, to try new things, to meet new people, to glean new ideas, to experiment with stuff, and you hope it's not bad stuff, but that's the nature of youth. Your key to success is not to keep them. It's to let them go, but to give them a reason to come home after they're done exploring. But we don't do that. I mean, I was at an event where it was a soup and sandwich. There were about 200 people from the community. We're going to use this tool shop, forget what it's called, Poll Anywhere, online. And so you logged on with your phones and it would show the vote in the room. And I was going to do a presentation around how to redesign your downtowns for the future. New businesses, Wi-Fi, housing to attract young people. Great. It was going to be good. Soup and sandwich event. Everyone walked in and grabbed a bowl of soup and a sandwich and sat down at these round tables in the room. Now, no one knew who I was, so I still walked around in my boots and my sport coat listening to the conversation. And everyone in that room was saying the same thing. But one guy said it best and loudest. He was a bigger guy with a big boisterous voice, and he sat in the middle of the room. A room that was full of seniors and high school students and university students and young entrepreneurs and Chamber of Commerce members and elected officials and administration, all there. And he said something to the effect that, I don't know why we're bothering to do this. Another fancy speaker here to tell us what to do. We didn't do what the last guy told us to do 10 years ago. And yeah, okay, so we attracted some new businesses on downtown. We lost a couple though. And yeah, there's some space in that new housing development we did. I know people moved in, but there's still empty lots. Besides, all the young people are moving to the city because there's no hope and no future here. I don't know why we're bothering. So everyone was saying stuff like that. I did my presentation. And I finished and I said, any questions? And he stood up and he said, what do we have to do to keep young people in our community? And my response was, shut up. I was never very politically correct. I did. I actually said that. It was blurted out of my mouth. I said, look, every one of you I've heard speak negatively about your community. The room's full of young people. You wonder how you're going to keep them, get them to come back, and yet you're chasing them out of town by speaking so negatively about your community. And yet, there is so much opportunity. My next book is called Renaissance or Revolution, with a line through revolution. Because revolution's about going back to what we had, capturing something again. Renaissance is about embracing the new. So it's Renaissance or Revolution, subtitled The Re-Rise of Rural America. Because I believe our rural communities are set for a comeback if we're prepared. But if we keep chasing people out of our communities, especially the next generation, what value is that? And yet, if you want to really have young people stay, you need to empower them to have control now. I still have people that say to me, those young people are great, but they can wait until they're 40 for leadership roles. They'll go somewhere else. We need to find ways to be more responsive to them. In fact, there was this person here in the United States, a young man, who went to a town council in his community and said, I want to clean up the park. I want to do it. And I don't know who it was, the chief manager or one of the elected officials, somebody said to him, that's a great idea. I appreciate your initiative. But you know what? We should make sure we pass a bylaw to let you do that. We have insurance then to cover you. And we should send out something to get more volunteers to help. And maybe we can even come up with something in the city budget that we pass first reading, second reading, third reading for that bylaw. We'll get it all done. Give us a year. And he looked at them and walked away. I can't tell you the words he used because they're not appropriate in a room like this, but he just left. And he went and got a few young people who went to that park the next day and took pictures of the park on Instagram before it was cleaned up, took pictures of the garbage bags after, and then took pictures of the park when it was all cleaned up with some hashtag. I think it was Clean My Community or Clean Up My Community. It went viral. It went all over the United States and Canada, and thousands of young people cleaned up their parks with not one bit of approval from a single local government. So I have local governments say to me all the time, how are we going to be effective for this next generation? And I always tell them that's not the question you need to ask yourself. The question you need to ask yourself is, how are you going to be relevant if you're not responsive? But if you want to kill your community, keep chasing young people out of town. Be happy with that. And when they leave, because youth is synonymous with the future, when they leave, your future will leave with them. Number four, shop elsewhere. I have, don't deceive yourself. I skipped one, that's why. There we go, deceive yourself. This essentially means have absolutely no idea about who you are. And I cannot believe how many communities do this. They do it in one of two ways. The first way they do it is they proclaim they're perfect. I started on the West Coast of North America looking up vision statements, mission statements, and slogans for communities. 54% of them, I quit when I got past Idaho. I quit because 54% of all the communities we looked at had a slogan that said something like the best place to work, live, and raise a family. There is not a single person that is the best place to do everything, not a single solitary community. And yet, when you proclaim that, it's called false marketing, false advertising. I mean, you take a marketing class and they will explain to you right away that if you say something that's not true in a marketing campaign, everything before that's a lie. So if I'm a new, is it iPhone 11? I'm a Google guy. So iPhone 11 dealer, and I'm trying to sell you one. Like, it will surf the internet, it will do videos, it will collect your emails, you can talk to it and it'll translate, all sorts of stuff, and you're still not sold. And I say, it'll wash your car and mow your lawn. Boom! As soon as I say something that's obviously not true, everything I said is a lie because now I'm not to be trusted. And yet, we proclaim to people our communities are the best place to work, live, and raise a family. That's saying you're perfect, and no one is. The second way the communities do it is that they try and be just like everybody else, right? They follow the same pattern. They adopt an economic development officer. They put them in the town office in the cubicle and give them no resources and say, go attract businesses. So what are you supposed to do with no resources? You go on the internet and you download an economic development strategy. There's dozens of them for free on the internet. They're all filled out for you. You just have to put the name of your town on it. It's great. And they all say to do the same thing. Build a housing development, build some new commercial space, and build an industrial park. Yay! And everyone does that. And even if you're lucky to attract one, those commercial spaces all look the same. I mean, I don't know quite what you guys have here. We have a Walmart and a Canadian Tire and a Tim Hortons. So maybe you got a Starbucks instead of a Tim Hortons. But they all look the same. And in most of those developments, they don't even mix the buildings up. They still look the same. And everybody wants one. And yet that doesn't make you strong or successful either. What makes you strong or successful is what makes you unique. And I tell every community we work in, figure out what you're going to be really, really good at, and be really good at that, and the rest will come along. In fact, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I mean, it's the Rust Belt. They lost massive industries and massive jobs, and their young people left, and they thought, what are we going to do? They just focused on seniors because that's the population they had left and providing things that they needed. They had groceries delivered from the drugstore. They had drugs delivered, all by younger people who were looking for employment because they didn't have any jobs. They built more walking trails indoor and outdoor. They had more garden parks. They even, I think, passed legislation that allowed seniors to drive their golf carts around town in lanes. Yeah, they loved it. And you know what happened? They didn't think anything special was going to come about it, but that's the one thing they focused on, not thinking it would benefit them in the long term. Except all those seniors in the winter left Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and went to Florida and Arizona and California and other places where seniors retire and bragged about how the community looked out for them. And a lot of seniors said, why do we go home in the summer to our place that doesn't care about us? And they moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And now Lancaster, like Burt Lancaster. I said that once, and a lady from Lancaster was like, no, it's Lancaster. They're growing. They have young people moving back. Their main street is busy. They have new developers showing up because of all the people that moved in because they wanted a quality of life. They focused on one group, one segment, and it turned out to work very, very well. But most communities are trying to be everything to everyone, and I can always tell they're doing it because they have a strategic plan that is about 104 pages long, and some consultant did it, and you pay by the pound, so they just keep adding reams of paper until it's, right? Nope, that only sounds like 50,000. Add 20 more pages, and then, right, until they can pay the mortgage off. That's what a lot of communities do. And you know what? When you try and do those things, be like everybody else. You're ignoring every single asset that makes you unique and strong. Just think if that was a person who doesn't know anything about themselves, has no appreciation for themselves, doesn't even understand themselves, and the only way they function and try and find success is to mimic what other people do. Do you know what we call them? Sociopaths. And yet that's what so many communities are deliberately trying to be, is sociopathic copycats of what every other community is doing. What makes you unique is what makes you strong and will make you successful. And I know I have people say to me, but Doug, if we focus on our lake, we're not unique because 50 other communities have lakes. Don't worry. They're not going to copy you. They'll be too busy trying to be unique or be like everybody else or be perfect. And they'll fail. So if you want to kill your community, I mean, just deceive yourself about who you really are and where your real assets are and what you're going to become. Try and be perfect or like everybody else, and your community will die. It'll be like that body in the morgue, right? The one that has no distinguishing features, no unique identity, nothing to separate it from any other body. And you know what they do with it? They put a toe tag on it that reads John Doe. Only when your community dies, its toe tag will read the best place to work, live, and raise a family. Was that too much? I thought that's one of my favorites. I like that one. Number 5, shop elsewhere. Everyone says shop local. I actually finished my MBA a couple of years, and there's an economic principle that says shop local. We know it's valuable because this principle says if I spend $1 in the community, you get it. You spend it, you get it, you spend it. 7 other people get to spend that $1 before it leaves. But if $1 is spent out of town, it's gone for good. So shop local. Except as consumers, we don't often follow that behavior. I mean, if you have lived in town your whole life and you start a business, this is what happens to you. If you're a newcomer into town, start a business, I'll get to you in chapter 11, okay? But right now, you've lived in town, you start a business, this is what happens. You take all of your net worth, all of your equity to open that business, and you're really excited. I mean, your business is going to grow, you're going to employ new people, you're going to create new jobs, you're going to grow your own net worth, you're going to grow the economy, you're going to be a good corporate citizen and provide money back to, you're going to do great things, and you're so excited about it. And then, in the coffee shop, the most evil place on earth, where nothing positive is ever said and very little truth is ever spread, except the one I was at the other day and the one that served us coffee here. That's a great place. It's really hip. I mean the traditional truck stop coffee shop where everyone gets together. We call it the Senate, and they start to know more than everybody else, and all they do is run everything down. They get together and they say, what a stupid idea. I can't believe they'd invest all their money to open a business like that. I mean, we don't have an economy to support a business like that. So if I buy my stuff from there, where am I going to get my parts? Who's going to service it when I'm in need? No, that's a dumb idea. I'm not shopping there. And everyone else who's also negative and critical sitting around them goes, yeah, that's a dumb idea. And no one goes to shop there. And the business goes broke. The second phase happens only if the business somehow survived that. And maybe they're doing okay now. Maybe they're actually doing pretty good. Maybe they're doing really good. And then the coffee shop banter changes to, did you see how much money they're making? They're building a new house over in the new subdivision. They bought a new car. And I saw down at the golf course, he's got those new big clubs. Those things are expensive. And I saw new rings on their fingers. They're making a lot of money. They're making too much money, those greedy business owners. And those folks, weirdly, will drive 20 miles down the road to another community to shop because they don't have to see that owner's car or house or wealth grow, and they feel better about themselves even though that money leaves the community. And that's all based on jealousy. And jealousy is the second most evil, of all human traits, because it is self-destructive. I mean, imagine, your house and your car are bigger than mine. So I gather my angry posse at the coffee shop, and we decide we're not shopping there, and you go broke. Yay for me. I don't have to be jealous anymore. Except your house and car are bigger than mine, and so are your golf clubs, and so are your wife's rings. So I'm going to get you next. And then when I'm done with you, you're next. And now my confidence is building, so I'm taking you out, and then you out, and then you out. And pretty soon, I have no one to be jealous of because I have the biggest car and house and everything because everyone else went broke. Yay for me. Except what makes anyone think you're going to have a job or successful business if you have no one to be jealous of because no one has anything worth being successful over? It's self-defeating. It will impact you. Jealousy. And then phase 3 comes along where the business finally goes broke or gets bought up by a corporate conglomerate and all the profits leave town. Or the owners move to another community where they don't have to be criticized about the size of their car, their houses, or their success and prosperity, and they can have some anonymity. And then everyone in the coffee shop looks at each other and says, what do we have to do to keep a business in this community when they're the ones that chased it out? Now, every single chamber of commerce says shop local because we know the value, but I have yet to find a single chamber of commerce preaching to local businesses, educating local businesses on the need to give people a reason to want to shop locally. Very few. I mean, you remember the mayor who owned the Shell gas station across the street from where that couple wanted to build, didn't want the competition? I got called from the community. They said, you need to give us a hand He's kind of an obstinate, ornery guy, and we're kind of scared of him. But he's hurting the community's economy. Could you just help us? Because he charged a 10-cent per gallon premium on every gallon of gasoline he sold because there was no competition. So he thought he could. And they said, it's hurting us all, so figure out how to do it. It was easy. I did a comparison basket of goods survey for the entire region. I went to the Chamber of Commerce and I presented it. So it wasn't about him. And I showed they were competitive in almost every single area in the region except gasoline. And I said, sir, would you mind helping us out? Could you lower the price of gasoline a bit? Because here's what happens. If people are upset about the price they're paying, they feel like they're being gouged, they leave. They go to another community down the road and they buy their gas. But while they're there, they buy their groceries, they buy their hardware supplies, they go out for supper or lunch, and all that money leaves the community. So could you help us out? And his response was, no. People have a responsibility to shop locally. So I left. Right? It was ridiculous, but I left. Now, I stopped in there a couple of years ago when I was going by. It had been many, many years since I'd seen him last, just to see how things were going. And I pulled in, and he used to be a Shell gas station, and now he was a Racetrack Gas. I don't know what that brand is, but that's what he was. So I pulled up, and he came flying out of the building like, Doug, I haven't seen you in years. This is great. What have you been up to? I looked at him and said, you used to be a Shell, and now you're a Racetrack Gas. What happened? And he said, they moved us to another brand that's smaller because we don't sell enough volume of gasoline. And I said, why don't you sell enough gasoline? And he said, because people in this town won't shop locally. And as I looked, he was still charging a 10-cent per gallon premium because there was no competition. He didn't realize he was hurting himself, his own business, and the economy of his community because it was always somebody else's responsibility. And that's ironic. I tell people all the time, I feel really bad for this young lady. I went to a wedding and I was supposed to do a speech and she spoke before me and she got up, very young, she's like 18 years old, and she said, marriage is 50-50. It's like, I went up next and I said, I disagree. I felt bad. But I explained, if it's 50-50, you each have half, and someone can only get to 40, then you're short 100% in the marriage. It falls apart. Marriage is 90-90. Each person giving as much as they can. And even if you falter a little bit, you still have plenty left over. You have more than 100% so that your marriage stays strong. It's the same with consumers and businesses in the community. Both have to give as much as they possibly can to support each other, or they naturally drive every dollar out of the community. And that's how you kill your community. If you want, you just keep driving, either a consumer or business, every single dollar out of your community, and your community won't just die. It will die penniless. Number 6, don't paint. Sorry. I've had people come up to me and say, Doug, you wanted 13, a magic 13 number. You had 12 really good ideas. You came up with don't paint and stuck it in the middle, hoping none of us would notice. Because they look at me and go, this is really superficial. This is judging a book by its cover, the beautification stuff. Doug, that's superficial. And I tell people, a lot of ugly covered books don't get read. I mean, that's why our publisher put this cover on the book. I mean, if you look at it, it's got a guy, standing in a hole with a suitcase in one hand and a cow in the other and a weather vane on his head. I don't even know what it means, but people pick it up. It's why I called it 13 Ways to Kill Your Community, because if it was called Strategies for Building a Successful Community, none of you would have read it. You wouldn't have been able to, because I would have fallen asleep writing it. There are strategies in there, but you need to have that outward appeal to make people appreciate what you're doing, to get to the next level, to find out there's good stuff on the inside. And it's important because we're all attracted to aesthetically pleasing things. We just are. Not one of you ever was at a wedding dance or a party or a bar and looked across the room and said, oh my God, he's ugly. I'm going to go ask him out. You just don't do that. You're attracted to aesthetically pleasing things, and it's not superficial. That outward appearance tells people whether or not you believe in your community, whether you believe your community is going to be successful, whether your community is strong. It's a sign of whether you're willing to invest in your own community's future. If you're not willing to, no one else is going to. And even if you know that, I've had people come up to me and say, I get that, Doug, but we got a lot of internal stuff to work on before we do any external stuff. Too bad, because it's genetically encoded. Even if you know it's superficial, you can't get over it. I mean, imagine, okay? Genetically encoded, this is demonstration. A female cheetah comes out of the jungle because it's time to find a mate. So she gets into the clearing, and there she sees two male cheetahs. This one comes out of the jungle, suave, strong, muscular, nice hair, bright eyes, right? She looks at this one, and he comes limping out of the jungle, busted tail, pus coming out of his eye, mangy hair, skin stuck to his ribs because he hasn't eaten in weeks. Which one is she attracted to? She is not superficial. She is just attracted to something that looks strong and successful. And our communities are the same way. I wish I had the power of Zeus or something I was in Detroit 6 months ago, exploring their neighborhoods and looking at the rebirth. I wish I could pluck a minivan with a family in it out of there and put them in some of our neighborhoods, downtowns, just so you could see their reaction. Because a lot of times where they come from, when they get into your neighborhood, their reaction is to lock the doors and roll up the windows and drive like hell to get out of town because they're scared of getting shot or mugged where they're at. Now we know they're not going to get shot or mugged. But what impression is your community sending? Its appearance tells them if you believe in yourself. But hey, if you want to kill your community, just don't paint. Although it might take a concerted effort to actually turn your town ugly. And even then, it's only putting an ugly cover on your book. It's only creating the appearance of failure. But if you're lucky, no one will pick up that book to read. No one will be attracted to your community. And eventually that appearance of failure will become a reality. Number 7. Don't cooperate. So I know you guys are cooperating on many levels, but I think it's worth a reminder about just how important it is and how it manifests itself when we don't. So don't cooperate. Just don't. That's an easy way to cause failure, but it's also a passive way to cause failure, right? I mean, look, you guys all decide you're going to do something for the region and grow and build and do something, and I say, I'm not participating in this, I disagree with you, and I refuse to cooperate. You'll go do amazing things, and I'll get the benefits because I'm still here, right? It's like being in school on a group project. You all had that experience where 4 of you were assigned to work on a group project by the teacher. One of you never showed up. Maybe it was you. Somebody looked at me, I heard like, oh, that was me. One of you never showed up. The other 3 people worked really hard on the project and got a top mark, and everyone got the top mark, including the one that didn't show up. So, if you want to kill your community, it's easy, just don't show up. But you're hoping the rest of the group will fail. If you really want to kill your community, you got to do more than just not cooperate. You've got to compete. And I don't mean the good competition I talked about in chapter 2, I mean bad competition. And there is such thing as bad competition. I was in a community, a little over 3,000 people, and that community needed a new community hall. A place to have weddings and social events, desperately needed one. So everyone was talking about it, and 3 volunteer organizations said, we'll build the community hall. I said that wrong, sorry. Say it again. 3 volunteer organizations came forward, and each wanted to build their own community hall. They didn't want to work together. They were in competition over volunteers to see who they could win over in the community. So they competed for 10 years. They competed for the same community volunteers. They competed for the same community donation dollars. They competed for the same government grants. And you know what happened at the end of 10 years? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. In fact, at the end of 10 years, the only thing that did culminate was that 2 of the organizations were so competitive, they deliberately had fundraising suppers on the same night just to see who would win. And the whole community said, we've had enough, and no one showed up to either of the events. So one of the volunteer organizations lost all their money and went broke and dissolved, and the other one almost went broke and came to its senses, went to the 3rd organization and said, let's work on this together. They shook hands. And from that day they shook hands. They say it took just over 1 year to actually have the grand opening of the hall. See, when they competed, nothing happened. When they cooperated, it took no time to get it done. But I don't just mean between volunteer organizations inside a community. I mean between communities too. I was assigned the job once when I was an elected official of going to watch 2 communities. And these 2 communities were, 18 miles apart. For you guys, 18 miles apart. And they were both about 1,500 people each. Now, a CEO of an agriculture processing firm showed up to that community, called the community hall for both of them. And again, we had seniors and young people and high school students and university students and entrepreneurs and chambers of commerce and elected officials and administration and you name it. Everyone was there, came out to this big event. And she said, we're going to build in this region, but we're not quite sure where we're going to locate. But I have to tell you, we're going to create so many jobs and there will be so many employees, you each will not be able to absorb them all. Both of you are going to grow. So you need to figure out how to share the taxes because you need to expand your schools, build new subdivisions, build new recreation facilities. Figure out how you're going to share them. And we'll be back. She said, I'll be back in a year and a half and we'll get started. So she left. Now, I don't know who did what to who in 1922. But those two communities hated each other. Like, it's Canada. So somebody lost a hockey game back in 1922 to the other team, and they hate each other. I asked them. They don't even know why they hate each other anymore. They just do. So one of them, they refused to meet. One of them wrote a letter to the other one's newspaper and said, we deserve this, give it to us. So the other one wrote a letter to their newspaper and said, we deserve this more, give this to us. So the other one wrote a letter and said, no, you guys are horrible. Other one wrote a letter and said, you're awful. And they just fought for a whole year and a half. In fact, they weren't happy writing letters to the editor. They wrote letters to the CEO of the company. And I saw the first two letters. The first one was written by this community, and they said, that community, they're a bunch of crooks. They'll lower the property taxes and lure you in. Once you build, they'll jack them up and they'll gouge it because they're crooks. So this one wrote a letter to the CEO saying, yeah, well, those guys, no one wants to live in their community because the school's full of drugs and there's so much crime and the housing prices are overinflated. So your employees won't want to live there, locate with us. I don't know how many letters they wrote, but you know what? I don't think the CEO saw those letters because a year and a half later, she showed up. And it was the exact same thing, called a town hall meeting. Everyone showed up from the town just like they did before. Except this time, there was a 10-foot line down the middle where no one stood. It was like no man's land because the communities had been fighting so much they were divided, literally divided. And she said, sitting at the front of the table, what have you guys come up with? I was sitting right there, so I know. And they started fighting. You should locate with us, we're better. No, we're better. No, they're crooks. No, no one wants to live there. I called her up a couple of years ago to ask her, reflect on it. And I said, can you believe like in half an hour, grown adults deteriorated to the point where they were yelling at each other? They couldn't even sit in the same room with each other. She said, no, Doug, it took 8 minutes. 8 minutes before they were standing up like junior high kids yelling at each other. And so she stood up after 8 minutes and they all sat down and you could see the look on their face like, this is going to be good. Let's see who wins. And she said, and I quote, this is all she said when she stood up, what in the hell is wrong with you people? We're going somewhere else. And she walked out and took the business with her. And I felt really bad. I thought, what a horrible circumstance. So I did some research. And it turned out their first battle was in 1922 when a business wanted to locate there in the region. And they fought over who was going to get it until that business left. Then an industry came and they chased it away. And every single time a new industry showed up, they competed against each other and chased it away. And if you ask them what the problem is, they'll say the province, the state won't help us attract business when they're chasing it away themselves. And I went back, 1922, each community was just over 3,000 people. At that time, they were about 1,500, and now they're barely over 600 people each. And they still can't realize that they're the ones chasing away business because they're not competing against each other anymore. They're competing against the rest of the world. But you know what those battles are based on? Lines in the sand. Arbitrary political lines in the sand that were drawn 130 or 140 years ago to manage the region by politicians. I mean, what was the world like 130 years ago? We rode a horse to town, if we had one, to take in the goods and bring out supplies. Our education system in Canada was based on, we called it a 4x4, 4 miles by 4 miles for a one-room schoolhouse, because that's as far as kids could walk to school and back in one day. Our education system, or our healthcare system, was based on how long it took a man with a little black bag to come out and tell you were going to die, because what were they going to do 140 years ago for healthcare? It was a little black bag. That was it. Our economy was based on how long it took you to travel to buy goods. Our politics was based on those lines. But what's the world like now? I mean, The next generation orders something online and it shows up in 2 days from anywhere around the world. I mean, even in the 80s, my grandpa and I had this game coming off the field in a 3-ton Ford overcab truck full of wheat. We had this game where he had a penny and he'd flick it and I'd guess, and it would decide if we went left to my hometown or right to the other town, one 7 miles away, the other 8 miles away. And the reason why we did that in the 80s was because 2 different grain elevators, we didn't know what the price of grain was at each, because no one had a phone in the field in the 80s. Now you can trade online anywhere, anytime you want. I know what's happening in Syria faster than my grandpa knew what was happening in town 7 miles down the road. The world has changed dramatically, but we still take those lines in the sand that were drawn and we fight over them like they're little kingdoms, little fiefdoms, where we're meant to defend our territory against those other people. I go all over North America and I can't believe how many people still fight about that. In fact, I was doing a session with a county and a town about the future of the economy and how to work together so that they could actually grow their community. And I was only half an hour into the presentation, and a guy from the county stood up and said, "Doug, you say we're friends, but you're wrong. Those people in town want our rural taxes so they can build a new swimming pool and put new streetlights up and put in new sidewalks. That's all they want. They are not our friends. They are our enemies." And another guy stood up and looked at him and said, "But doesn't your mom live in town?" So I have a new presentation called "I've Seen the Enemy," and it's my mom. If you want to kill your community, don't cooperate. Remain fiercely independent, and then when your community dies, it won't just die, it'll die alone. Number 8, live in the past. There are 5 ways that people do this. I use acronyms for them. Now, you need to understand, for each group, they get crazier and crazier as we go along, okay? With me? First group, NIMBYs. NIMBY stands for Not in My Backyard. Okay? So, for an example for them, you want to build seniors appropriate housing in your community. You want seniors to stay, so you're going to build housing. So, you get a plot of land, you get it all done, and then you read chapter 6, don't paint, you realize, oh, we don't want this ugly plot of land, so you put some grass down, you put some trees, this is going to be great. And you wait a few years till you get the funding in place and you find partners to develop with, you get it all secured, then you're ready to go and you go to build there and then people say, that's my backyard. My kids play in there, that's our park. And they know you want seniors housing, you need seniors housing, they support you in that, they just don't want it there. So you go from green space to green space and vacant parcel to vacant parcel and everyone goes, that's my backyard. And you don't build it. The next group are the bananas. Bananas stands for build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. Bananas. And they're a little crazier. I was in a community. They invited me in because their economy was suffering and they couldn't figure out what the problem was, so I did an assessment. And it was easy. It was a very wealthy community and their housing was expensive because it was a prosperous community, kind of a touristy place, and they didn't have appropriate housing. So I said to them, you don't have appropriate housing. I actually said housing, affordable housing, and that's apparently a bad word, because when I said affordable housing, one of the folks looked at me and said, you know what people who live in affordable housing are like? They have too many kids and too many dogs and they don't mow the lawn, and that will ruin the motif of our community. So I left. They invited me back in a year and a half or so later because the problem was getting worse, so I did an analysis, and this time I changed the phrase. It was the same problem. You don't have enough housing affordability. Right? It doesn't have to be subsidized and it's not cheap, but you don't have housing for single people that never want to get married, or couples that never want to have kids, or older couples that have older kids, or older couples that have younger kids, or seniors that are active and independent and alone, or seniors that are couples and their kids move back in with them. I'm really sorry, but that happens sometimes, right? But all sorts of diverse housing, because diverse housing helps. And I told them, your problem is that you don't have enough housing affordability. The people who work the jobs in your town are coming from another community. When they find a job there, they don't commute. And now the businesses are closing because there aren't any people to hire. And since the businesses are closing, the economy's in the downcline. Now people are moving out and your housing prices are going down. So, change it or you will have housing affordability whether you like it or not. And they said no. And yeah, home prices have dropped nearly 50% now, and the community is suffering horribly, but they refuse to diversify the housing base. That to me is bananas, which is why I call them bananas. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. The next ones are the cave people. CAVE stands for Citizens Against Virtually Everything. And I call them cave people because they live in the dark and they refuse to see the light. They don't care. They do live in the dark. When I did my MBA, I volunteered in a small community because they had a problem with their books, their accounting, and they needed to save some money. So I went in and did another analysis, and it turns out really small town, really small community. The couple of people that worked in the office were older ladies who didn't want the job, and when I talked to them, the office was open Monday to Thursday, and they said, well, we don't need the job, do whatever you need to do. So they saved the money they needed by being open Monday and Thursday. So I did the public consultations with the town. Everyone was like, yeah, no, that makes sense. That's all we can do. We'll carry on. And did all the public consultations. But you have to do the last one to get everyone's approval. That's when the cave people show up, right? They don't show up when you're discussing ideas. They just show up to be in opposition to whatever you're doing. So I made the proposal, and 2 cave people stood up at the back and said, you can't do that. I may need to go to the office on Tuesday or Wednesday or something like that. I said, well, okay, if we don't do that, then the only other option is to raise taxes to pay for that cost. They're like, you can't do that either. It's like, do you have any ideas? They're like, nope. Well, then why don't we won't do either. I'll just go back to the drawing board. We'll leave things the way they are now, and I'll see what I can come up with. They're like, well, you can't do that because that's not going to work. That's all they do. They're just critics. You can't do something, you can't do the other thing, but don't you do nothing. And their opinion is completely worthless. They live in the dark and refuse to see the light, which is why they're called cave people. The next group are called nopes. Remember, they're each getting crazier. Nopes, not on planet Earth. I like those folks. And I call them nopes because that's their response to everything. Nope. I wrote my philosophy degree. I have an honors degree in an honors degree in philosophy, specializing in environmental ethics. So I'm a staunch environmentalist, but I'm also pragmatic. So I have a lot of environmentalist friends, and I say to them, so, your whole, we'll leave the oil and gas and coal and everything in the ground forever and just stop today. How are we going to do that? Because wind and solar are great, but they don't replace the power and energy we need. They're like, nope, leave it in the ground. I'm like, okay, let's be reasonable. Those big windmills you like? They're made out of steel, which gets made in a coke plant, which makes you have to have coal to create the steel to make it. You can't do it with wind and solar. And they're like, nope, I don't care, leave it in the ground. Like, if you don't have anything, millions, maybe billions of people will die. Nope, I don't care, it's good for the planet, just leave it in the ground. No talk about transition. Those kind of folks, and I have no problem with religion, okay? None whatsoever. Religion is about faith. There's no answer yes or no or facts you can use to say it one way or the other. It's about your faith. But when facts are available for other decisions, they're right in front of you, and your faith is that everything should be left in the ground, despite all the facts and the consequences, that's crazy. That's like a religion, even when facts are available. You believe it despite the evidence. That's crazy, which is why they're called nopes. They just say nope to everything. And then there's so you've got the NIMBYs, bananas, caves, and nopes. The last group you have are the fears. Fears stands for fire up everyone against reasonable solutions. See, the first 4 groups will tell you why they're opposed to something. The last group isn't happy with that. They want everyone else in the room to also be afraid. And they do it by spreading fear to make you opposed. I was in an event. We were talking about the future of the community, and it was just an hour-long meeting. We were going to do 60 questions in 60 minutes with that poll anywhere thing I suggested earlier. And everyone was in the room. And I got everyone set up. I had the town council lined up here. I had the Chamber of Commerce lined up here. I started ready to ask questions. You vote with your phone. It was really cool. And everyone was excited. And one guy at the back stopped me right at the beginning and said, no, I will not work with council. They lost $56,000 of taxpayers' money in a corrupt deal. I won't work with them. And he got up and left and never came back. I was like, thanks for the contribution. Tried to get everyone back to work, and I realized I was losing the room. Like, people were saying, what, $56,000? Who got that money? Who made this decision? Who got it? Did it get paid to? What was the deal? And the noise level was going up, and I was losing the room. So I ran over to the mayor and said, what's he talking about? And the guy said, I have no idea. So I said, well, you better tell people. So the mayor got up in front and said, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what he's talking about. And you know politics in today's day and age. People started to say things like, liar, cover up, what are you hiding from us? Tell us the truth, what's going on? So I sat him down. I was actually a little scared someone was going to shoot him. It was Texas. So I sat him down and I told everyone I'll find out the truth. But I couldn't get everyone back in the room to find out. But it turns out he was kind of telling the truth. Council had invested, not given it away or thrown it away, $56,000 of taxpayers' money in a high-risk venture. The town was desperate to do something. It was dying, so they put that money in a high-risk adventure, and it failed. They lost it. It wasn't corrupt or anything. It was also in 1972. He left that out. It had happened 40 years before. I mean, I went and checked, and everyone who was on council and responsible for that decision was dead. There wasn't even anyone alive to apologize to him. But he didn't want an apology. He wanted everyone to be distrusting of people at the front of the room. And you know what? He left and he went to the coffee shop. And half the people in that room followed him after we were done because we didn't do any questions. And they said to him, you're our guy. You keep these crooks honest. You make sure that they're telling us the truth. We'll be watching you. So he felt empowered. So he started a Twitter account and a Facebook page and a website and continued to spread half-truths to keep people riled up. And when he ran out of those, he spread outright lies. And it was just to keep people divided. If you challenged him, he'd make up something about you and tell you guys, and make up something about you and tell you guys, so you were so busy fighting with each other, you didn't even know he was responsible. And they told me it came down to 10 nights before the vote. They had a debate, a forum, and one young lady even stood up and said, why are you doing that to this town? Like you're tearing us apart, dividing us as a community. You're breaking us apart so everyone hates each other. You're destroying this community. Why are you doing that? And apparently he made up something about her personal life right there on the spot. Almost ruined her life. And half the room said, yeah, I heard she's like that. And the other half said, what the hell's going on? Almost ruined her life. He lost by 3 votes. It was that close. He had no plans for the future. Yeah, I know, I'm happy too. Because he had no plans for the future. He just wanted power, and he didn't care what he cost to get it. And he was willing to destroy the community for it. So if you want to kill your community, NIMBYs, banana cave people, nopes, and fears, just keep giving them power and a microphone. Let them spread the fear and talk about the past, and your community will die with no future. It will become part of the past. Number 9, forget your seniors. Everyone gets this impression that seniors are this cordial, easygoing group. They're dangerous. They are. They're what I call the STPs, the same 10 people. And when I was an elected official, I met you guys. I would go into a community, we'd talk about economic development, the same 10 people. We'd be talking about it for an hour, and everyone would look and go, oh, we got to wrap this up. I got other things to do. So everyone would leave. And I'd go 10 blocks down the road to the other side of the community where we'd meet to talk about building a playground, and the same 10 people would show up. Right? They sit on town or county council, the Economic Development Authority. They volunteer at the Chamber of Commerce. They run 2 businesses or work 2 jobs. They coach basketball, and they coach track. They do all sorts of things, right down to putting the chairs away at church, because that's what they do. They know they're responsible for building a community. And seniors are like that. They were community builders 60 years ago before we had government grants to help, and they are still community builders. Once you're a community builder, you're always a community builder. Now, I know they retire and they want to go off and enjoy life, so we think that they're gone forever. They go golfing and they go travel, but they come back. And they want to volunteer and do things. They want to be needed. We all want to be needed. And so they want to volunteer. But I have actually heard people say, she can't volunteer now because she's everyone will listen to her and it's my turn to be the boss. And so they shut those seniors out. Now, even those folks, and it's about quality of life, right? My grandpa retired from the farm, and he and his girlfriend of 25 years, my grandma passed away before I was born, they went to a little place south of Phoenix, Arizona, 6 months of the year. And you know why they picked that little community? Because it had square dancing. I didn't get it, I didn't see it, but that's what they like to do. And when they couldn't go there anymore and they were permanently in Alberta, they didn't move back to the farm. They moved to a little community called Viking. And you know why they picked Viking? Because it had square dancing. That's what they like to do. Now, I have lots of people say to me, it's not my responsibility to do anything like that. They can create it if they want, but I'm not going to help. But even those people feel guilty, and I've heard them before say, ooh, you know what? They need housing. Right? Lots of seniors don't want to shovel the snow or mow the lawn. I know you don't have problems with that. Do house maintenance, and they just want someplace they can lock up safely, like a condominium, so they can go away for 6 months of the year. And I'm not talking about healthcare housing or affordable housing, just seniors appropriate housing. And so they partner with a private developer, and they get the lot, and they build it all up, and they think seniors will go in there and play shuffleboard and crib until they die. No, they'll sneak out. They will. They'll come outside, they'll volunteer in your community, they'll spend money because they're natural community builders, and they will help make your community better. If you really want to kill your community, don't even have appropriate housing. And they'll have to move to other places like Arizona, California, Florida, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which 2 years in a row is the number one place for seniors to retire in the United States. Look it up. And they'll take their money and their love of their community with them. And because they're the foundation that built up your community, when they leave, the foundation will crumble. And your community, your house, will come down upon itself. Number 10, nothing new. Reject everything new. Keep your thoughts, I like to say, keep your thoughts within sight of the water tower. And I only do this because when I was a new MLA, I was elected in the by-election in April, and so I worked really hard. I lived in my truck almost. Stopped in to see my folks in October, and they said, "You look tired." Now, my mom was a travel agent. That's how they subsidized their ranching habit. So she said, "You need to plan a holiday. If you don't, you're coming to Mexico with your dad and I." What else would a single 29-year-old guy want than to go to Mexico with his mom and dad, right? But I forgot. And so I got home at Christmas, stopped in, and they handed me an envelope, and there was a ticket to go to Mexico and the bill. They weren't paying for it. They just said I was going. But you know what? I thought, this will be fun. My parents are young, and they're energetic. It'll be great. So I went with them and their friends, and we had a blast for a whole week, except one of my dad's friends. His name's Ron, and he knows I tell this story and knows the correction I make. Ron didn't like any of it. Nothing. He didn't like the Mexican food. He didn't like the Mexican beer. He didn't like the Mexican sun. He didn't like the Mexican water, the Mexican music, the Mexican language, the Mexicans. Like, I've never heard a man complain so much in my entire life. And I asked my dad, why is he so upset? My dad said, and I quote, "Son, he has never been out of sight of the water tower." And I can picture him driving down the road with his wife and kids, driving, looking in the rearview mirror until he sees, can't see the water tower, time to go home. That's as far as I go. And Ron admits that that's true. That's why he didn't like it. I mean, now they travel all over the place and he's changed. But lots of times, we keep our thoughts within sight of the water tower. We haven't done something, so we don't want to try something new. I mean, I guarantee you, just about every single one of you has been at a meeting where someone has suggested a new idea, and the argument against the idea is, well, we've never tried that before. That's the point. I mean, Einstein describes insanity as doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results every time. But lots of our communities are doing that. It doesn't mean you have to come up with something no one has ever come up with before. There are solutions all over the world, all over North America. There are rural development institutes at just about every single state and every single province in North America. There's research being done. In fact, communities are telling you what they did to address the problem because that's part of their marketing, to say, look at what we do. You just have to take their concept and their idea and make it fit your scenario, and you can find a solution to just about every problem that's out there. Except most of the time, we presume we're alone. We're the only ones facing our challenge. We're the only ones whose downtowns are in decline, who are facing small housing and deteriorating streets and can't pay for our infrastructure. No, you're not. You're not alone at all. There are thousands of communities out there just like you that have found solutions. Don't do exactly what they did. Make it yours. But you don't have to do what you've always done. Because if you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always got. And your community won't just go insane, die. It will go insane as it does it. Number 11, ignore your outsiders. Outsiders are a very unique and masterful group of people because they picked your community on purpose. Right? They picked up from where they were and they moved to your community. They're going to build a business or get a job, build a house or move into a house, whatever. They've decided that's where they want to live and raise their family on purpose. That's a huge asset we underestimate. In fact, most of the time, we look at those outsiders and we call them outsiders. We have names for them. Fobs, knobs. In fact, there are, in Eastern Canada, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, they are called come from a ways. Yeah, there's a play about it that's in Vegas right now, Come From Away. It's about a plane landing in Newfoundland from the 9/11 terrorist attacks. They don't even sugarcoat it or use an acronym so no one knows. They look at you and go, you're a come from away. I did this presentation talking about the value of outsiders, and a lady stood up after with Q&A and said, I'm an outsider. And I said, that's horrible. And she said, yeah, they call me a come from away. That's the first time I'd heard that. And I kind of laughed, and she said, I'm not joking. And they all put their head down like, yeah, that's true. And I said, what's it like to be a come from away here? And she said, well, you know, every time I make a new suggestion about that something, they say, you're not from around here. You don't know the way we think. You don't know our history. You don't know the way we do things around here, so you just be quiet. And I said, that's horrible. How long have you been in town? She said, 23 years. And her friends put their head down, and so that inspired me to do some research. And I've done research around North America surveys, and it turns out to be not an outsider, but an insider in your community. To really be an insider, your parents have to have been born there. That means a new person moves to the community. It takes 3 generations before those kids are finally considered insiders. And yet, what's the qualification for being an insider? I mean, it amounts to, I fell out here, I guess I'll stay. It's a birth certificate. That's all it is. You're born there and suddenly you're an expert. You know what it makes you an expert of? Who did what to who in 1922? It makes you an expert on the past, not on the future. And so we've got this huge group of outsiders where all you have to do is ask them what attracted them to your community, and you can leverage that to attract more outsiders. Because I tell everyone, every single community that wants to grow, I ask them, and it comes down to their saying to themselves, we need to attract business, we need to attract people, we need to attract industry. And I get them to describe it. And they're talking about lots of business, lots of industry, and 1,000 people, or all the people. You just have to attract one. And if one moved to your community on purpose, find out what incented them to move there and leverage that to do more. Quit trying to do everything. You don't need them all. You just need the first one, and the next one will come. That's how it works. But hey, if you want to kill your community, then ignore your outsiders. And before anyone gets offended, I said this a long time ago, and I still say it, so please boo, but just know that I've said this before. If you really want to kill your community, to keep the outsiders on the outside, build a wall around the community. Not literally, I never meant literally, metaphorically. Do something to make sure they never feel welcome and they have to go somewhere else. And they'll take their appreciation for your community with them when they go. And then you, when you're dying behind that metaphorical wall, when your community's dying, you'll realize you're dying in a prison of your own making. Number 12, become complacent. This is the tortoise and the hare argument. You've all heard the story, right? The tortoise challenged the hare to a race, and the hare was like, I'm so fast, I'll win. Got way ahead, laid down and had a nap, and then the tortoise won, right? Lots of communities feel like they're so far ahead they can stop. Except when you stop, you lose momentum, and you don't know when it's time to start again. And so many communities do that. And I can usually recognize when they're doing it because they want to build a sustainability strategy. I have no problem with the concept, except that when I talk to people about getting a sustainability strategy, I ask them what that means. They don't mean sustainable. They mean status quo. Let's just keep things the way they are. It's like a giant safety meeting. Nobody moves, nobody gets hurt, right? And so that's what they want, nothing to change. Except if you're going to be sustainable, that doesn't work, because all it takes is one business to close. One. One business closes, that's now 13 people unemployed in your community. They have to go somewhere else to find a job. You know what they do when they leave to go find a job? They take their families. Less kids in your school, less utilization in healthcare, less volunteers in the community, less money being spent. 13 families not spending money is enough to cause another business to close. And then those people need to leave to find another job, and they take their families. Less kids in your school, less utilization of your healthcare, less volunteers, less money. You see how it starts to spiral out of control? If you really want to stay here at status quo to be sustainable, it takes hard work. So I tell people, don't use the word sustainable. Use vibrant, aggressive, dynamic, adaptive, entrepreneurial, anything that says you're going to do something about your community's future. And then if you're lucky, you attract a new business that opens up. That's 13 new jobs created. That's people that don't have to leave. Maybe it's people that have to move in to take those jobs. And you know what they bring with them? Their families. That's more kids in your school, more utilization of healthcare, more volunteers, more money spent. 13 families spending money could be enough to cause another business to open. 13 new jobs, 13 new people, 13 new families. You see how it grows up? Or if you're lucky, it stays here. If you're lucky, that new business opens and one closes and you get that status quo. But it takes hard work just to stay where you are. But so many communities say, we're doing really well. We'll just hold tight. And before they know it, they've laid down to have a nap and they have lost the race. Number 13, don't take responsibility. It's just that easy. And it doesn't really take much to say, but I'll say something. We confuse the word blame with responsibility all the time. I hear people say, I'm not responsible for the trade war with China. I'm not responsible for the price of oil and gas. I'm not responsible for the free trade agreement causing us to lose a bunch of industries. Wrong, wrong, wrong. You are not to blame for those things. You didn't do them, but you're still responsible for what you're going to do about them. I mean, imagine, you and I work together, but I'm the boss, and I'm a jerk for an entire year, and out of the blue on some Friday I say, you're fired. For no reason whatsoever. You're not to blame. I am, because I'm a jerk. But you're still responsible for what you're going to do about it. Are you going to go file human rights complaints? Are you going to go find another job? Or what are you going to do? You're always responsible for what you're going to do about it, even if you're not responsible for it happening. And that's important. So if you want to kill your community, you have to not take responsibility. But the only way that works is if you give it to someone else, right? So I like to blame the mayor. It works well, right? It's easy. The mayor, the council, the administration. I mean, seriously, we used to show up in church 20 years ago and pray for a miracle. Now we show up at the town office and demand one by Friday, right? That's what happens. Except that the town is only responsible for the municipal corporation, not every aspect of the community. That falls to everyone. So if the mayor's heard this, he'll say, no, or she'll say, no. Doug said it's our responsibility, and they'll push back. So pick someone else. Pick the governor. Pick the president. Pick the United Nations. Blame ISIS. I don't care. Pick a teacher, a preacher, a doctor, a dentist. Blame the kids that are playing basketball out on the courts. I don't care who you blame, because none of them are more responsible than you, or you, or you, or you, or you, for building your community. None of them. If you want to kill your community, don't take responsibility, and then your community can die, and you'll feel completely guilt-free about it. Last thing to say, I have been doing this now, I was calculating on the plane, for 26 years. Not this presentation, but working on community building in all sorts of capacities. And I've discovered something. A group of people that decides it wants to be successful cannot be stopped by any government. But a group of people that decides it's meant to fail and there's nothing they can do about their own situation cannot be saved by God himself. When we believe we're meant to fail, we find a way to prove ourselves right every single time. So you need to build your community and know it's your responsibility. One other thing, some people take these, if you read the book, and there's lots more stories in there. There's also stuff on the website if you want that's all free for the taking, new articles and videos and stuff. I have people that say, you know what, we were inspired by that, so me and a friend, we went down to the coffee shop and we looked and laughed at them and went, you're being a chapter 7 and you're being a chapter 3, and we laughed. And they said it took their power away, because as soon as we could laugh, it didn't hurt us anymore, and it made the negativity ineffectual. And then I heard some people have also said to me, you know what, we were sitting there talking, and I looked at him and said, you're being a chapter 6. And he looked at me and goes, right, no blame, but I need to fix this, and would change. So it helped them monitor each other's behavior and correct their attitudes to make sure they were focused on success. But I've also heard from people that the hardest part is when you're alone. Because if you're laughing at other people, that's fine. If you're laughing at each other, that's great. But when you're alone and you're talking about doing something to make your community prosperous, it's when you're alone and those people come up to you and say, it won't work, it can't happen, it can't be done, that you feel frustrated, you feel angry. And anger is the most evil of all human traits, because we never, ever make good decisions when we're angry. But your temptation is to be angry and become defensive. So I tell people, when someone looks at you and says, it won't work, it can't be done, just look at them and instead of getting angry, smile and say, those who say it cannot be done should not interrupt those of us who are doing it, and get back to community building. And if you need a hand, give me a call. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah. However many you want.
You know, some people are always harder to follow than others. Real quickly, before I say some parting words for you, we could take up to 2 questions at this point, and we would ask after that that you would meet with Doug at the back. And we do invite you, be adventurous. Winter is not a bad season of the year here. Stay at 5 o'clock and have some food and some beverages sponsored by the Henderson Rotary Club. So we can take 2 questions rather quickly if the audience has them. Wow.
One there. There's one there.
One? Okay.
Yeah, no, it's actually 32 or something jobs on average, but I use 13 because that one works well for me, and it frames it in your mind, so, yeah.
Thank you. Is there another?
What's that?
Excuse me? I think it was a chuckle about what beverages we may or may not have. I don't think that, he's a great friend from the north, but he brought the bad weather, but I don't think he brought the spirits or the craft beer from up north. Doug, before you leave, we have a parting gift from Vance Granville Community College for you. You can now be an honorary Vanguard, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. 13ways.ca. There are bookmarks out there, and my phone number is actually in the back of the book. If you have any questions, I know people are shy to ask personally. Community building is the most important job on earth, so if you ever need a hand, we're around. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I say some concluding remarks, Mayor Ellington from Henderson would like to say something rather quick and brief.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank y'all for coming today and being a part of this. But I do want to do one thing. I want to recognize a gentleman that's here today. And he had a lot to do with what went on downtown and these buildings. And you never know until you sit in the seat yourself, and I can relate to that. And I just appreciate him and his leadership. And he was in office. It was a tough time for Henderson. But I want to recognize former Mayor Clem Seifert, who's here today. Clem, if you're here, will you stand up, please? Clem, we appreciate you. Thank you, man. Look, y'all have a good evening. I'm going to bring Dennis back up.
My name is Dennis Jarvis II. I'm the Director of Economic Development here for the City of Henderson and Vance County. I want to thank real quickly, I see many of my community leaders have the chair of our marketing committee for the EDC. I also have another member of the marketing committee. And I encourage you to go to our website and look for yourself about the growth our community has had in our 2 years here, the progress our community's had, and it's all started with visions from leaders like Commissioner Tommy Hester, who is the chair of our EDC, Mayor Ellington. We have a wonderful county administrator, Jordan McMillian, and a brand new to us, Terrell Blackman, the city manager for the city of Henderson. They bring, yes. In all 4 of those, we have youth, we have vitality, we have vigor. And I am pleased to say, in the 2.5 years, the progress that we've made. If you look at your playbill, since we are in the theater, you see that this was the final act, that Doug Griffiths was our final act. And I say to you that this isn't our final act. I would say to you that we need to look to the sequels in the next year that will be coming. And I always like to, if you've heard me speak at Rotary, and I invite you to come, I always try to have a flavor of a good quote And John Updike, an American novelist and poet, once wrote, "I suppose sequels are inevitable for a writer of a certain age." And we are in a certain age. We're in a millennium. We're in the 21st century. We've had people talk to you about our regional initiatives. We've had people talk to you about our local dynamic. And as you stand here, you're in one of these august chambers where some plays don't need sequels, like Death of a Salesman. And unfortunately, some movies get 10 franchises, like Fast and Furious 58. But let's come back here in a year and let's write our sequels. Let's talk about our goal is to have a region that writes, produces, develops, and launches subsequent sequels on the successes and the endeavors that we have. Let's advance our workforce. Let's make a development on new investments in Triangle North industrial parks, that we come back together and we talk about the steads that Vance Granville will make, not in just one county, but 4 counties. Let's come back together. I challenge you, let's come back together and produce a new situation for our region. When we come back in 2021 and 2022, that we're talking about the regional assets that we have as a region that's vibrant, vivacious, and full of vitality. I came here with my family 2.5 years ago. We have not looked back. I have traveled many miles in this region, and I look for many more to come. So I challenge you once again, let's write our sequel. Let's invite Mr. Griffith back, and let's talk about 13 ways we have progressed our communities, 13 ways we have grown our communities, and I challenge you to be with us. If you don't volunteer in a group, do so. If you're not mentoring in the school system, do so. If you're not shopping in one of your downtowns, do so. I can't commend all of you for staying through all of this muck and bad weather. I'm a son of West Virginia. Trust me, I can drive in it. Y'all can too. But listen, anytime you want to come back to Henderson and Vance County, lunch is on me. Jordan doesn't mind paying the bill. Comes out of the taxpayer budget. But I challenge you, let's come back and let's write our sequels. Let's keep momentum going, and let's be the dynamic region in 2 years that everyone else in this great state wants to emulate. I thank you for being here.